Hello everyone, a very good afternoon. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Aparna and I'll be hosting this webinar. Before we get started, please let me take a few minutes to introduce Payatu. Payatu is a research-powered cybersecurity consulting firm with a decade-long track record with a singular focus on cybersecurity. Our foundation rests upon three pillars: community and conferences, consulting and training, products. Community and conferences encompass NULCON, an international security conference, training, and exhibition platform. Hardware.io is a hardware security focused conference along with other initiatives. Consulting and training focuses on thorough security assessments, which helps businesses to discover security threats and further provide training to strengthen network infrastructure. Lastly, we have three offerings: IoT Auditor, an IoT security testing and compliance platform. Exploity is an open source IoT security testing framework. Exploity Academy is a comprehensive online learning platform that empowers professionals with the knowledge and skills to excel in the field of cybersecurity, particularly in the context of securing IoT devices. Here is an overview of the various consulting assessments we are known for across the globe. We have delivered many cyber talks and workshops in top security conferences that include Black Hat and DEF CON. Recently, our community migrated to Telegram from WhatsApp. This is due to the member cap set by WhatsApp, because of which only a limited number of people can join the community. For those unaware about our community is a platform meant for fostering knowledge sharing and collaboration in the cybersecurity realm. We aim to educate various organizations with industry-specific cybersecurity content. Today, Abhishek Payatu, Senior SCADA Security Consultant, will deliver a webinar on cybersecurity risk assessment in OT or ICS. You can read all about him on this slide. Before I hand it over to him, I request you all to follow a few housekeeping tips. Please be on mute. If you have a question, you can write it in the chat box. We'll answer the question at the end of the webinar. We will be releasing the recording of this webinar on our digital channels, so make sure you are following Payatu. If you're not currently following Payatu, please check the links provided in the chat box to find Payatu's digital channels. Without further ado, let's get started. Abhishek, over to you.
So hi, good afternoon, everyone. So today we will be discussing risk assessment in OT and ICS domain, and I'll be walking you through this crucial topic. Let's discuss the outline and what we are going and what we will be discussing in this particular webinar. Though OT cybersecurity risk assessment or ICS cybersecurity risk assessment is not a small topic which could be covered in an hour. However, I'll try to give you how, in whatever brief manner I can, explain you everything. So the overall agenda of today's session will be, I'll be introducing you to OT ICS systems and their role in industrial processes. We'll discuss why OT ICS cybersecurity is important. Then we'll navigate you through the unique risk landscape of OT systems, why it is different and why it is uh, crucial and why it is different from IT, and why its awareness is very crucial uh, for industries and organizations such as utilities and manufacturing industry. Further, why cybersecurity risk assessment is critical, what are the outcomes, what we can get from cybersecurity risk assessment. Once we'll discuss all these things, we'll go back to basics and we'll understand what overall risk assessment is, how and what should be the workflow of risk assessment. Then understand how to perform risk assessment as per 62443. Further, understanding what is target security level is. And at last, we will perform a risk assessment with a sample architecture. And we'll see the whole process flow with the help of one example. Now, what you guys will be getting out of it is, first, you will be having an improved understanding of how to perform risk assessment in OT environment. Second thing, how very well we can incorporate ISA IEC 62443 overall risk assessment process. If you already have risk matrix, businesses risk matrix is already there, how this can be integrated, how 62443 can be integrated in that existing risk matrix. Further, participants will see example of OT risk assessment with the help of example assessment, as well as it will help that how these techniques can be effectively, they can apply effectively in their own operations. If you are doing an internal assessment, how you should be able to do it for your own company. If you are a consultant, then how a consultant can perform that for a client. So in this webinar, we will utilize certain tools, Excel sheet, if possible, CSHAT tool, and certain important resources will be shared by with the client with the during the webinar. So I'll be switching through the presentation and these resources. So bear me with the inconvenience that it can cause. So before going further and understanding risk assessment, let's have a look on what is operational technology and what is ICS. Usually people use these terms synonymously. How these terms are different from each other, and you know, sorry, my bad. So how these terms are different from each other, and what should be used where, at least that, and where they are getting used in industrial environment. So if we'll go through it, let's say what operational technology is. So it is combination of hardware and software which are used to monitor, control, and supervise your physical devices, processes, as well as events in industrial operation. So anything and everything which is helping you run your operation or helping you run your operational environment is operational technology. So certain things which will be part of that is sensors. Sensors are something, let's say you have a manufacturing plant, you wanted to fill certain value. Let's say you have a bottle and you wanted to fill 180 ml of bottle. That sensor is identifying that whether the output or the liquid which is going out is 180 ml, it should not be more than that. So there is a sensor which is sensing all these things. Then actuators which are making sure that okay, it is happening the way it is. Let's say running a conveyor belt. So a motor which is running a conveyor belt is an actuator. So the basic parts of operational technology are sensors and actuators. Then supervisory control and data acquisition, which is something which is used to control, monitor, and collect the data which the operational data of your industrial process. Distributed control system, programmable logic controllers, as well as HMI. So these are some examples which could be part of which combining these things you can create an OT environment. However, this is a very small list. There will be n number of systems which could be there, like safety instrumented system is there, then energy management system is there. So uh, this list is huge, but I have taken a basic examples so that all the people can relate with these terms and technologies. Let me take an example. Let's say in a manufacturing plant, a PLC automates the task on the production line, and the SCADA system is monitoring all those tasks remotely. So this is an example of operational technology. Now, what is ICS and how it is different from OT? So ICS is nothing but a subset of OT. So it is also helping you to manage your operations, but it is specifically referring to the system networks which are used to control industrial processes. Let's take what its function is. So ICS is combination of various control systems which are used to automate and control industrial operations. So in OT, the operation must not be industrial. It can be anything, any automated operation, if you are managing with the help of technology, that is operational technology. In ICS, it is specific to industrial operations. If we'll take example with the help of application as an example, if we'll try to understand. So in manufacturing, let's say automation of a production line is industrial control system. However, if you are collecting the data and analyzing that automate data of your production line is something which will come under operational technology. If we'll take example of energy, control of power generation and distribution is example of industrial control system. Now, what could be the example which will not fit in an IC industrial control system but fit very well in operational technology? So the thing is, the best the if we'll talk about smart grid or advanced metering infrastructure. Now, advanced metering infrastructure and energy domain does not fit under industrial control system, but it is operational technology which where you are automatically monitoring the consumption of energy uh, throughout the grid infrastructure. Now, transportation, let's say example, it's management of railway system or rail system is industrial control system. In utilities, water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, control and monitoring and management of water and wastewater treatment plant is an example of ICS. And in oil and gas, refinery process control, pipeline monitoring and leak detection. So these are certain applications of industrial control system. Now, if we have we have understood what is OT, what is ICS. So let's try to understand why OT ICS cybersecurity is important. So if we'll talk about OT ICS cybersecurity, it is little bit different. I'll say a lot different from IT cybersecurity. Reason being, there is safety of people and environmental is at stake. So the most important thing which can be impacted with OT and ICS cyber attack is human and environmental damages. Plus, it can impact, let's say, if you will take an example of a chemical which is an automation production line which is creating a chemical, and attackers get hold of that environment and they change the chemical composition, then your product quality is getting damaged. If they change certain composition of any pharmaceutical medicine which is getting created, then the quality of that particular batch is getting impacted. So over here, first thing, the human which are working on the plants, on the automation lines, in the substations, that is at stake. Second, your product's quality it is at stake. And third, your infrastructure is at stake. Like the overall plant, the machines which are installed are very costly. And if something goes wrong and it can damage your uh, machineries, it can have a very big financial impact on the organization. So in this term, Gartner has done an analysis, and it's their analysis that the environment, the in on OT environment, if the future, the APTs which are getting created, the attackers are the kind of information that attackers are getting, they can create a cyber attack which is likely to weaponize OT environment, and this weaponized OT environment can successfully harm or kill humans, and that will be possible by the next year, that is 2025. So it says why OT and ICS cybersecurity is important. If we'll talk about availability, in OT, cyber attack can stop your production, can hamper your maintenance, overall dependencies can be. So over the idea is in availability, your production can be stopped. Taking an example, if someone can impact the power grid, it can create a blackout across a major cities. So the availability is also at stake. Further, in integrity and confidentiality, you need to keep, the important part is whatever your operators or the engineers which are monitoring and managing OT and ICS cybersecurity, whatever they are visualizing, it should be, stored correctly. It should be transmitted accurately. Let's say if you are taking certain data to do further analytics and then you wanted to improve your product quality, and if that data is getting impacted, so in future your product quality and reliability can get impacted. Another example, if transmitted information is, there is a wrong transmitted information is going to operator at their operation screen, they can take wrong decisions based on the values which they are seeing. The physical value will be different at the site. The value of, let just basic example, flow meter value at a pipeline is different, but operator who is visualizing that flow meter on the SCADA screen, he is seeing something else. And if he takes a unintentional wrong decision with the help of that value, it can impact your operation. However, in certain places, confidentiality is not that important in OT infrastructure, but in some industries where you have your own prototype, you have done a lot of R&D and found out your own chemical composition, like pharma, Pepsi and Coca-Cola have their own composition formula. And if that get leaked because you are running that formula, you are creating your product with that formula in your plants. So if that get leaked, then whatever investment that you have done in R&D, that is going to get impacted because anyone can create a cheap prototype out of it. So yeah, in OT and ICS cybersecurity is important because the highest importance is over here is safety, then availability, then integrity and confidentiality. So let's understand all this unique risk landscape of OT with the help of certain examples. We discussed that safety is there, safety is important, human and environmental damage can happen, products security and quality can get impacted. Let's take an example how it can happen. So let me take you the example of a chemical plant. Let's say in chemical plant, someone impacted a control system which leads to a toxic gas leak. And we have not identified that this control system operation can impact or can create this risk. Then this can harm the employees which are working on that environment. Second, the operational disruption we have seen. This example is very well known. That is Ukrainian cybersecurity, Ukrainian substation attack, where attackers got the access of the SCADA system and they tripped the circuit breaker and created blackout in Ukraine. Now that blackout has two impacts. First, there was no electricity in Ukraine. Second, it was done on a very important date, that was 23rd December. Now in December, Ukraine has a lot of uh, you know it the environment is very cold over there. Now if you don't have electricity, you cannot run thermostat. If you cannot run thermostat, ultimately it can lead to human safety, which is dependent on electricity, which is provided by the power grid. So it can impact the availability, and all these things can ultimately cause a lot of financial impact. Equipments can damaged, you can have a legal liabilities, you will lose the production if these kind of cyber attacks can get converted into kinetic. Take an example, there is if a manufacturing facility, if it experiences a costly downtime due to any kind of industrial control system failure, if they cannot produce the product, they will not be able to if they are not generating or creating their product, they cannot be able to sell it. So that's something which is, they have lost the productivity. If they have lost the productivity, there will be financial impact out of it. So this explains the unique risk landscape, how it is unique from IT, what things are there which are at stake. Now let's understand before going to risk assessment why risk awareness is very crucial in OT and ICS environment. So to know and understand each and every risk which could be caused by cyber incident on OT and ICS is very important. Reason being, first, our operations, like if anything happens, if any incident happens, we need to get it uh, resolved in real time. Understand, we in OT environment, these are real time deterministic operations which are controlled and command executed with very precise time window. Like if something happens, like if one particular substation is out, and if one particular power generation plant is out, you have a sudden generation, your generation got reduced very suddenly. Now if your generation got reduced very suddenly, you need to match your generation as well as whatever amount of power which is getting distributed. So you need to make decisions very quickly in real time that what should be done. So that is why all kind of risk, whether they are very small, we need to know and what kind of impact they can create to these environment. Second, why risk assessment is important? Because these operations are certain OT and ICS operations are safety critical operations. They can affect physical processes, they can create equipment damage, they can create environmental hazard, as well as human life can be endangered. So that is why understanding and knowing every risk, their impact is very important. Plus, third part is the OT and ICS ecosystem is very complex. Reason being, we have lot of vendors and protocols. It's not pretty easy like IT that we have TCP/IP, we have certain fixed protocols which are running. However, OT and ICS environment relies on wide range of protocols. Ethernet IP is there, Profinet is there, S7 is there, Modbus is there, DNP3 is there. You cannot count on fingers. These many protocols and systems are there, and every system have different vendors. So monitoring and managing each and every system and protocol is very difficult. And finding out what kind of vulnerability and risk can be there with these systems, we will be able to identify if we know and if we are aware that okay, this is the issue, these are the vulnerabilities, and this vulnerability can cause uh, this risk to my environment, and ultimately, is it really impacting my infrastructure? If it can impact my infrastructure, what should be done? Plus, this we have studied, and this we have gone through in safety critical operation as well. We will revise it like there. Here we have physical and cyber systems are interlinked. So a physical, something which is done physically can impact your uh, computational environment as well as any cyber threat can impact your physical environment as well. Like if your PLC or your RTU is in remote area, someone goes and just remove the wires, that can also create the uh, overall, that can also stop the data which is transmitting. So thing is, these are interlinked, and because these are interlinked, they can impact each other, right? So let's understand that why cybersecurity risk assessment is important and critical in OT. So cybersecurity risk assessment is critical in OT and ICS environment. Reason being, we need to identify the overall threat vectors and attack surfaces. The thing is, let's say OT systems, they use legacy devices. Because they use legacy devices, they might have issues with they don't have authentication and authorization. They might not be using encryption, right? Second, we need to find out the vulnerabilities. So with when we are performing risk assessment, we will be able to find out the vulnerabilities, like, we will in the which are there in the system and how they can impact our environment. Once we have identified the, all the gaps, vulnerabilities, risk assessment will helps us in quantifying and prioritizing risk based on real world impacts. So we will get a quantifiable metrics to evaluate the likelihood and impact of all these threats that we have identified and visualized. Further, we have threat vector, we have attack surface, we have quantified and prioritized risk. Now, based on quantified and prioritized risk assessment help us make an informed decision to implement countermeasures and minimizing the attack surface and reduce the risk of downtime or any kind of impact which can caused by these vulnerabilities and risk. And in certain places in India, we don't have any regulatory compliance till now. However, it ensure us that we are adherence to standards like ISA IC 62443. And if you are someone who is in US or you are someone who is in Middle East, you are able to comply with NERC CIP or NCA OTCC. So that is why performing risk assessment is very crucial and important in OT and ICS environment. Now let's understand what is risk assessment. We have understood what till now. We have understood what is OT, what is industrial control system, why their our threat landscape is different, why what is important, why risk assessment is crucial to OT and ICS environment. Now let's understand that what is risk assessment. Now we all might have seen this formula that risk is nothing but threat into vulnerability multiplied by consequences. And threat and vulnerability, the combination of both, can also be said as likelihood, that is probability that this specific action can occur. Now let's see each and every term in detail. Say, what is threat? So threat is something which is potential danger or actor. It could be hacker, malware, insider threat that could exploit a vulnerability. Now, what is a vulnerability? Vulnerability is weakness in our industrial control system, such as we have insecure configuration, we have certain software bugs, we don't have adequate protection, and these vulnerabilities and weakness can be exploited by the threats which are there. And ultimately consequences is something that potential damage or loss, the potential impact that can happen if attacker can attack successfully. So then what kind of financial loss, safety hazard, operational damage or reputational damage can happen to our environment or industry, that is calculated as consequences. So overall risk is threat is combination of threat multiplied by vulnerability multiplied by consequences, and threat and vulnerability is provides a likelihood that whether it can, what is the probability that it can happen, right? Now we have understood what is risk. Now let's understand what is risk assessment. Now risk assessment is process of identifying, estimating and prioritizing these risks. So the definition suggests us that this assessment will help any organization to understand what potential threats are there, what kind of vulnerabilities are there in your architecture, and what consequences they can have in your on your environment, which can affect the safety of the people and environment, the security, and operational any operational impact that it can cause. So finding out whether any risk can really impact, if there is a risk, can it impact our environment or not, that is risk assessment, if we'll say in one line. So let's jump on to risk assessment as per IC 62443. So before going on to risk assessment as per IC 62443, we need to understand what are the prerequisites, what are the information that we should be having in hand while performing risk assessment based on IC 62443. The first and foremost, we need to gather information about system under consideration. We need to find out, we need to define what we are assessing. That is defining system under consideration. That, okay, we are uh, reviewing X process of the overall plant, or we are reviewing complete plant. So that is identifying system under consideration. Now we have identified what is system under consideration, then finding out or getting the asset inventory, getting the system architecture, as well as getting the network diagram. So sometime you might get this from your uh, team at the plant. Sometime you might not be able to get it. So you will have to create the asset inventory, you will have to create the system architecture, you will have to create the network diagram, existing network diagram, uh, to perform further assessment. Why asset inventory is important? Reason being, how you will be able to perform the risk assessment if you don't know what kind of assets, what kind of devices which are there, and how they are connected to each other, and what kind of vulnerabilities will be there in those assets which can be exploited by threat actors. So that is why asset inventory is very important before performing any kind of risk assessment. Further, risk matrix. So there will be a business risk matrix which is available uh, in the organization. If the risk matrix is not available, we need to sit and discuss with the uh, know, plant team and create the risk matrix. We need to discuss with the environment, asset owners, and create the risk matrix by ourselves. Obviously, risk matrix will can have 3x3, 4x4, 5x5 matrix. We will see an example of risk matrix today as well. Plus, we need to get any process hazard analysis or hazard and operability study which is already been done on the environment. Now, till now we were all talking about cyber, we were all talking about network, asset inventory, system architecture, network diagram, risk matrix. Suddenly we have jumped to process hazard analysis and HAZOP. Let's discuss why it is important. So all the PHA and HAZOP, they focus on identifying safety, operational and process risk, which can be interlinked with cybersecurity vulnerabilities in industrial control system environment. And cyber attack on these infrastructure can lead to operational failure, your system safety incidents, or any hazardous situation. So it is very important that we integrate the results which we have got from PHA and HAZOF into our cybersecurity risk assessment so that we can identify the actual impact on the environment. Just if we'll take an example, let's say there is a malware attack which happens on PLC, which is controlling chemical process, and which can lead to any unsafe chemical mixing or percept, or it is increasing the pressure post limited values. Now, PHA HAZOF will highlight that it is a risk, and we can map this with what kind of cyber issues, cyber weakness and vulnerability can create or can impact this risk, right? So we need to identify identify and categorize all the assets. So we need to have the asset inventory, we need to have all the PLCs, HMI, we need to have network diagram, we need to understand the network diagram and how these systems are communicating with each other. We need to have a risk matrix. If risk matrix is not there, we need to create a quantifiable risk matrix with ourselves. We need to get the PHA and HAZOP study done as an input. Then we need to gather the threat information. Now, threat information might be different for different environment, entities, and infrastructure. Now, let's say basic threat that we cannot visualize the one of the operating station. This might not be that impactful for any manufacturing plant because the process is already running, right? On the other hand, if the same thing happens to grid infrastructure, if the same thing happens to any other critical infrastructure, the same threat could be, you know, can create a havoc. So understanding that what kind of threat can impact our infrastructure, plus based on your network architecture, whether that particular threat can really impact your environment. If your network is not connected with IT, or it is very lightly connected with IT, and you don't have any remote access and you don't provide remote access, then any threat related to remote access is not that impactful for your environment because uh, likelihood of that threat is very less. So you need to gather all the threats information that could be there. It's better if you perform threat modeling and find out that what kind of threat can impact your OT network infrastructure. There is a good resource by Sense on performing threat modeling in OT and ICS environment that can go through. Then ultimately gather vulnerability and gap assessment report. If vulnerability and gap if there is no prior vulnerability and gap assessment performed, it is very important to perform vulnerability and gap assessment before performing risk assessment. So if vulnerability and gap assessment is already done, we need to gather that report. If vulnerability and gap assessment has not been performed, we need to perform vulnerability and gap assessment. We'll see that what we'll see an overview of what need to be done in vulnerability and gap assessment and what kind of resources can help us in this. Now, let's discuss if threat information is there, it's fine. If it is not there, as a person who is performing risk assessment, how a person can gather all the threat information which can impact your environment. So the first and foremost, we need to identify the source. So there are certain source which I have listed over here, that there are government agencies like CISA and NIST, which usually provides latest threat intel on OT and ICS infrastructure. Industry groups are there like ISA, ISAC is there, and there are certain commercial provider. However, there are cost involved in it. Now, second thing, based on your environment, we need to leverage open source information which is there. So we need to leverage an OSINT. We need to go through, review all the blogs and forums, what they are talking, what kind of recent incidents which are happening on the industry where we are, let's say on manufacturing. The recently a lot of ransomwares are going on manufacturing. So what kind of ransomwares are attacking manufacturing, how they are impacting. So we need to gather all those information because that is something which will help us identify the newer threat which can impact our environment. And then using the tools like Sodan, so you can identify that, what based on looking at your CIDR, looking at your products, whether these products are exposed to external environment or not, and these kind of information can be identified from Sodan. Another another thing that when if we need to identify threat information, we need to have a vulnerability assessment done. So now to perform vulnerability assessment, there might be certain things. If your infrastructure is properly segregated, you can have uh, certain tools which are already there, like Clarity, Nozomi. These tools are available. You can have those tools installed in your infrastructure and perform gather the information and perform vulnerability analysis, vulnerability assessment. If you don't have tools available, then open source websites are available. You need to create your asset list. If you will see, the there is a project, ICS advisory project. What you can do is, let's say in your asset, one of your asset is Siemens S7 1200 PLC. So you can search vendor, you can search the product, and all the vulnerabilities which are there in Siemens S7 1200 will get listed. So these are all known vulnerabilities will get listed in this. You can see whether these vulnerabilities are actually applicable to the firmware version which is installed at your site, and you can create a list out of it that these are the vulnerabilities. If I'll click on one, I'll reach to uh, ICS advisory, that what are the advisory is there, what devices are affected, what kind of you know impact it can happen, plus what we need to do, what recommendations are there from CISA as well as the vendor Siemens. So these can be identified, and these advisories, the recommendation of these advisories can be implemented. Like a basic thing which is already written by CISA, that we need to minimize network exposure for all control system devices and ensure that they are not accessible from the internet. So if it is already not there, then our likelihood has reduced a lot. If we have already located our device behind the firewall and we have isolated this device from our business network, we have further reduced the likelihood of this particular uh, vulnerability. And then further, if someone is, so these recommendations which are given on these vulnerabilities can be implemented if not already implemented. Plus, as I was talking about OSINT, so let's have a look on Shodan. So you have already asset list which you have got. If asset list is not available, uh, let's say asset list is not available. Let's discuss that first. If asset list is not available, it is not necessary that we should be having the paid softwares which are already there. Say Clarity provides asset inventory, Nozomi provides asset inventory. There are a lot of tools right now which are providing asset inventory plus uh, live threat monitoring. However, if you don't want to invest that much, or you don't have, your risk is not that impactful. Like even if your environment is getting exposed, you have time to respond. Then there are open source tool which can be utilized. Like I'll take you through one of the presentation first. So you all might have heard, if not, there is a tool called Grass Marlin. Have you heard that about that tool? You can put that in the chat. So Grass Marlin is something, it's not an active tool. It cannot have the live identification. So I have just taken some certain screenshots of Grass Marlin that you can see on. Uh, is my screen visible, Parna?
Yes, your screen is visible. Vishal.
Yeah. So Grass Marlin can be used. It's an open source free tool which can be used. You can capture the PCAPs. Once you have captured the PCAP, you can load that in Grass Marlin. You will find out the communications or the connections between the assets, which between the IPs with this tool. Important thing, you can get the IP addresses, their connectivity between each other. Plus, you can select and select particular IP, and you will get all the connectivity of that IP with all other assets uh, in the Grass Marlin app. If you will see this particular slide, you will see there are a lot of fingerprints which are already there in Grass Marlin, which are from OT, like backnet is there, back office there, your DNP3 is there, Ethernet IP is there, Modbus is there, certain fingerprints of G and Hitachi are already there. So it is very well equipped to give you a basic asset inventory out of it, and then you can further do a manual work and complete that asset inventory by yourself. Even if you will see further that it provides all the logical nodes with the IP addresses, which can be exported into Excel, and then you can create your asset inventory. So if you are doing and you are looking something to do and create an asset inventory one time, and if you don't have centralized environment, this is a tool that can get it done for you. And there are certain proprietary tools are also available if your complete plant is of let's say Siemens. So Siemens has their own tool that can be run on the environment. Make sure these tools, which are proprietary tools, use certain level of active probing. And if your network is already choked up, I'll not recommend you to use those tools. So yeah, let me now let's go back to so we know how we can get created asset inventory. We can use Grass Merlin for that. Now, once our asset inventory has created, we know what kind of assets are there, what vendors are available in our environment. Later on, what things which are already impacted in, or the information which is already there in open environment for each and every vendor. There is a good project which is ICS rank, where you can get the docs for Shodan for each and every vendor, the devices, what kind of ICS type. And if you have a educational license of Shodan, or if you have a paid license of Shodan, you can use certain things are free, which is vendor ID, searching the CIDR. But for certain docs, you might have to use paid license of Shodan. So you can just use these docs to find out what assets are publicly exposed, whether those assets are those assets which are publicly exposed are your assets or not. You can check that CIDR of that asset. Let's say, let's just we have seen simplicity. There is one of the asset which is already exposed in public, that is uh, make sure it could be you know how honeypot as well. However, nowadays, if it is honeypot, Shodan also gives a sticker, or also gives a warning that this might be honeypot. So if you'll see in India, this particular CIDR, something related to simplicity is exposed on public network. So we can find out what is exposed, what kind of open ports which are exposed. If this public IP is yours, then we need to make sure that it should not be exposed. So these kind of open source intelligence can be performed to identify that till what level we are exposed to the environment. Let me go back to, yep. Now to perform vulnerability assessment, once we have identified the assets, we have identified the firmware versions, we know which version is installed. We can very well use ICS advisory. We can very well use NVD database to find out open vulnerabilities which are there. Even ICS advisory provides uh, it's an open source project, so they provides connector which you can utilize to create your own simple code, and you can continuously fetch the data for your asset inventory and update your vulnerability uh, report weekly, monthly, based on, because vulnerabilities in OT are, they are getting identified, but it is not like IT where you are getting a lot of vulnerabilities every Tuesday. And even if you get all the vulnerabilities, it is not that easy that you will be able to mitigate all the vulnerabilities. Reason being, you cannot change the asset. It is not that easy to update the vulnerability. You need to have the downtime to patch and update the systems, and you need to check that what kind of impact these updates can have on the environment, whether rollback is possible or not, because in IT rollback is pretty easy. So that is why if you are not investing a lot of money, if you are not going for the tools which are there, you can use these open source information and open source resources to create your own vulnerability assessment system. Now, there are a lot of good platforms which are there for information sharing, where people are collaborating with each other, they're collaborating with their peers. The conferences which are happening recently, lot of conferences which are happening in OT and for OT and ICS cybersecurity, lot of awareness. You can get lot of awareness. You can connect and collaborate. Lot of people from industry comes there. There might be certain incident which they can discuss their learnings. They will be discussing with you, which you can utilize to create the overall threat information. And further gathering all the vulnerabilities, gathering all kind of resources, understanding your network architecture really well. Further, you can create a threat modeling of your infrastructure. I'll not recommend to use Stride or any tools which are very good for IT. Uh, if possible, after this session I'll share one resource from Sense on our community group, where there you can understand how you can perform threat modeling on OT infrastructure really well. Now, as I have said, that to perform risk assessment, vulnerability and gap assessment is a prerequisite. Now, to perform vulnerability and gap assessment, if you already have if the team has already performed, you can already take that. If it is not performed, as we discussed, for vulnerability identification, we need to identify vulnerabilities associated with all the assets which are there in your infrastructure. Just an example, if you have Windows XP installed in your HMI, then it is outdated and it is prone to security flaws, for example, Eternal Blue. As we have already discussed, that we need to use vulnerability databases like NVD, Exploit DB, and map our assets with all these known vulnerabilities, so we know what vulnerabilities are there in the infrastructure, in our infrastructure. Now, once that is done, second thing is finding out the gaps in configuration which are there. We need to uh, create a comprehensive checklist based on the assets which are available in our infrastructure. Now, PLCs, which brand PLC, do they have any secure configuration document that they have provided during the installation, or they have certain best practices document which was already provided? Because if now you will go and reach to these companies, the people whose product you have used, they will say, okay, secure configuration or minimum baseline configuration defining is a separate service that we will be providing, and you need to pay us X amount, and we will go and analyze your infrastructure. Instead, if you have that investment, go ahead, get it done. If you don't have that, then usually for all these assets, they do provide, when they configure and when they uh, perform the EPC of these plants and environment, they provide best practices that need to be performed uh, you know during network configuration and all these things. So based on that, we need to create a security checklist for each and every asset, whether it is PLC, HMI. Once that checklist has been created, we need to examine each OT device's configuration based on that checklist, that whether all these things are configured properly or not. Now, once that is done, third is performing network security assessment, where we can review current security architecture, what is their, review firewall, their setting, review IDS, review identity and access management. If it is implemented, there are um, identity and access management, a centralized identity and access management you might not see very often in uh, a lot of uh, industrial control systems. So review all those things, assess how the network is segmented, is your corporate and control environment is segmented properly or not. If it is segmented properly, or certain kind of communication happens in between, how it happens. Let's say you need to push the Windows updates from now. They will not directly come in OT environment or control environment. You need to push them from corporate to OT, and then from OT they will spread everywhere. Corporate to DMZ, DMZ to OT. So is it properly isolated? How the policies has been defined for these kind of communication between this segmented network? Is the network really segmented or not? Finding out all those things, identify what kind of ports which are open, whether they are really, whether those ports are really needed to run your control zone operations. If it is not required, then uh, we might need to update our security setting and close those ports. Because finding out the open ports, understanding what threat and risk they can have in your environment, and what is the likelihood of that risk and threats, and based on that, finding uh, creating an informed decision whether we need to close those ports and what need to be done. And then detecting all the unnecessary services which are running, unnecessary application which are there running in the systems, identifying those, removing those, doing once in a while, to perform whitelisting and all. So this this need to be done to find out all the vulnerabilities and gap that can be there in the system. Now this says what kind of vulnerabilities and gap will be there. Vulnerabilities can be risk to your environment. Please understand one thing, a PLC which has a remote access vulnerability related, any device which has vulnerability related to remote access, and that device is not at all exposed to remote access in your environment, then that is not a risk to my environment, or the risk from that device is very unlikely in my environment. So understanding that is very important, because you cannot just make a decision, oh, I have 100 critical vulnerabilities open in my environment, I need to you know revamp my whole infrastructure. This will not fly away with the people who are running the business, the management who is taking the decision. They need to understand whether that vulnerability really poses the risk, and if it really poses the risk, what kind of risk it can have to my environment. Please understand that very carefully, because let's say there is a issue with the web server in a web server of PLC, and now I am using that PLC and my web server is disabled, then, and it might not be exposed to or likelihood to getting that PLC exposed to external environment is very less, then my overall threat get reduced, right? So that we need to understand. So that is where risk assessment comes into the picture. We have understood vulnerability and gap assessment. Let's understand risk assessment as per 62443. Now, as we have rightly understood, to perform risk assessment as per 62443, the first and foremost thing is identification of system under consideration, which you need to, the assessment of which you need to perform. Now, input for that will be initial system architecture, asset inventory, which is already there. If you already have, if you don't have asset inventory, review, perform initial assessment, and update your asset inventory and system architecture as per the current environment. You might get older architecture, you might get older asset inventory. You need to sit and discuss with your maintenance team. You need to sit and discuss with your plant team and update your system architecture and asset inventory uh, based on that. Once you have updated that, you need to get all existing PHA and HAZOP risk assessment. You need to get the risk matrix, which is designed for your corporate risk matrix with all the security level targets. Based on that, you will be performing first high level assessment, that is initial cybersecurity risk assessment. Now, once you have performed the initial cybersecurity risk assessment, you know what at what system can get impacted what kind of threat can impact which particular asset, right? And that asset can impact which control process or which operation. So, let's say PLC 1 is prone to 10 vulnerabilities, and those 10 vulnerabilities can create 6 or 7 threats. Now, whether those threats can, what kind of damage those threat can create will be defined by what particular process that PLC is controlling. Whether that PLC is controlling any process or only monitoring the information, only collecting the data, working as an, uh, taking the sensor values only. So we need to understand that, and based on that, further, we need to partition our architecture into zones and conduit, where we will define initial zones and conduit. We can create a diagram out of it. If we don't want to create a diagram out of it, we can define what particular asset should be in what security zone, what zone, and that zone should have what kind of security level. We can define that into initial, uh, by utilizing Excel as well. Once we have done that, we'll we have already have our high level risk assessment. We have already defined the security levels based on vulnerabilities and risk and their impact. Then we will be performing detailed risk assessment, because now we understand that what target security level is needed for what zones and conduit. So now when we know target security level, we can have an informed decision that how much risk we wanted to mitigate, and if you want to mitigate that risk, what kind of controls we need to implement, what kind of countermeasures we need to implement. So once we have done detailed risk assessment, we have implemented the countermeasures, then we will get the residual cybersecurity risk and security for each zones and conduit. Based on that residual cybersecurity risk, if anything need to be done, what or we need to accept, discard, or transfer the risk, that everything will be documented in CSRS, and further it will go for the approval. Now let's understand this workflow in detail and properly. So initially, we need to calculate initial risk, that is unmitigated risk. Now, unmitigated risk is something where we have not implemented any countermeasures. If we have not implemented any countermeasure, if it is completely exposed to the environment, then we will identify that what could be the consequences and likelihood. Based on our current network architecture, whatever security is already there, we will find out initial risk without implemented any mitigation. Now, when we have found out, we will implement countermeasures. After implementing countermeasures, we need to recalculate the risk again. Now, if we look the same into 62443 way, the workflow is we need to identify threat and vulnerabilities, determine the consequences and likelihood of each and every vulnerability. Based on consequence and likelihood, we might define that what target security level we wanted to achieve for that. Because if consequences and likelihood is less, we need to have a less target security level. If our consequences and likelihood is more, we need to have more target security level. Based on that, we need to find out what existing countermeasures we already implemented. With these existing countermeasures, we will again re-evaluate the consequences and likelihood. Now, based on this consequence and likelihood, we will determine what is the residual risk. Right? Now that residual risk will be compared with the tolerable limit, that whether that risk is acceptable to our environment or not. If that risk is not acceptable to our environment, we will then decide that whether we need to implement any additional countermeasures, or we need to accept the risk, or we need to discard the risk, or we need to transfer the risk to third party vendor, or we need to buy in certain kind of insurance and all. So let's further discuss, because till now we have understood that we need to determine consequences and likelihood, we need to determine SL, target SL. let's understand what is target security level. To understand target security level, it is nothing but a desired level of security control and measures that is required to protect identified risks and threat. So how we can identify which target security level need to be achieved? As we are doing that, it should be identified with the help of risk assessment, where we will find out that our what kind of potential threat could be there for our asset and zone, what kind of vulnerabilities are there in our asset and that particular zone, and what is the criticality of that zone or the individual asset. Based on that, we need to take an informed decision that what security level need to be achieved, or what security level need to be targeted for our environment. Because and then what usually we get with this target security level. So usually as per ISC 62443, we have four security levels, that is SL1 to SL4, where each level provides progressively stronger protection. Each security level says or provides requirements which will help us attain higher security, cybersecurity maturity. So if we establish security levels for each zones and conduit, as an organization, we will be able to identify and implement all the necessary security measures and controls to achieve that particular security level. Please understand, like, because a lot of investment is involved in OT and industrial control system, we neither want to underperform, or we neither want to, nor we want to overkill whatever security measures that we are implementing. So it is very important to identify what kind of security we wanted to attain based on likelihood and consequences, and then implementing countermeasures which can help us attain those security levels. So now we have understood what target security level is. Let's understand how we can establish these target security levels. Now, to establish these target security levels, people are using different methodology. Now, if uh, cybersecurity governance is running by a team which is from IT, and they already have a method where finding out, which is pretty similar to ISO 27001, that we need to create risk register where we will find the difference, what is the unmitigated risk and tolerable risk. If unmitigated risk and tolerate like, if unmitigated risk is more than tolerable risk, then we need to implement a countermeasure. If that is less than uh, you know tolerable risk, then we don't need to do anything. So there is one thing, we can define SL based on that. Idea is, it can, like, we cannot define it as a single value. It can be as a single value, it can be as a vector. Every infrastructure or organization, companies, they are utilizing their own methodology. There is no fixed method to est- establish target security level. You can go and define based on SL definition, that is 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can follow that. Or further, you can have a qualitative security level, where you will say that you wanted to have a high level of security, critical level of security, low level of security in the infrastructure. So it can be, so we will see with the help of a risk assessment sheet that how it can be defined. Now let's take an example of a water treatment plant. We will take architecture of water treatment plant, and we will see how risk assessment need to be performed for this particular infrastructure. So first thing, if you will see, we have a corporate uh, zone where external firewall is there, which is connected to internet. Then we have IDS, the corporation or organizations router is there, where we have public historian and remote access server. Then we have a water treatment plant infrastructure, SCADA server, operator workstation, engineering workstation, the network uh, devices which are there to provide connectivity, and the PLCs which are controlling and managing the processes. Further, other treatment plants are also providing the data with the help of here it's an older infrastructure where that data and information coming with the help of radio gateways. So now we have seen this architecture. Now, first thing what we need to do is, now this is our system under consideration. We need to have asset inventory for this. So first thing is, if asset inventory is available, create asset inventory. If not, uh, just let me. Aparna, what's visible on the screen? I just wanted to confirm. Is the Excel visible on the screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah. So if you'll see the asset inventory, we have asset name, asset type, it is hardware, software. In hardware, software, what kind of hardware or software it is. Then asset ID, whatever ID is defined in their asset inventory. Now, so this asset inventory, one thing, somewhere you can get, a detailed CMDB and you can extract the asset inventory out of it. If CMDB is not available, there are tools, certain industries have already installed, asset monitoring tool so you can get inventory out of it. If not, we have seen an example of Grass Marlin that can be used. We can capture the PCAP and create asset inventory, and then we can map that inventory with the help of the people, or having or connecting with the people on site. So we have got the asset inventory where we have asset type, asset ID, what make is there, what models are there, what versions are there, what is software and firmware information. If it is an PLC, what firmware version is there, HMI, what particular firmware version is there. If it is a software, let's say Windows XP, then which version of Windows XP is there. IP address, MAC address, you might be able to get everything at the site, or you might not be able to get everything. So that's certain example. What ports are, then identifying what ports are open and all those assets which are available on the site. Then what protocols these are using, uh, who is the asset owner, and then how they are configured. They are configured standalone, or they are configured local, or they are configured centralized in a centralized manner. So this is the way you need to, there might be n number of ways of defining asset inventory. You might get 10, 20 more columns, but to perform cybersecurity risk assessment, certain things which are important is make, model, version, software version, the IP addresses to identify what zones and conduits are there, the open ports and protocols which they are using. So this is something which is important from cybersecurity point of view. So this is the minimalistic asset inventory that we need to have. Now, based on these assets and environment, we need to define and create the risk which this environment can have. This environment can have, anyone could insert infected PLC, anyone, a contractor can get access of engineering workstation from remote access, right? So all kind of, like an internal adversary, whoever is there, no, he can utilize any open telnet port of HMI. So whatever kind of risk can be there, first thing is we need to list all those risks, whether these risks are there in your system or not. Irrespective of that, what maximum can go wrong, you need to define all those kind of risk which can happen in the environment. Now you have the list of risk which is there in the environment, then you can start performing risk assessment. So a risk or a threat action which you have already seen, let's say we have control zone. In control zone we have a lot of assets over there. In risk assessment sheet we have taken certain examples of assets, let's say HMI station, Windows software, another HMI which is there on the in the system. And uh, if you will see the threat actions which are there, are cyber as well as physical. All kind of threat actions are considered over here. So let's take this example of HMI. Let's say adversary gains a remote access via threat is adversary gains a remote access via open telnet port. Now, whether how that threat can be utilized if the ports are open. So vulnerability is this vulnerability? We need to find and identify whether this vulnerability is available in our system or not. So in HMI, in particular HMI, this or operating workstation, it is available. The ports are open. Now, if these ports and services are open, threat is adversary can get remote access via open telnet port. Then what what could happen? So if adversary can utilize telnet port, it can have access and we can lose the control over critical operation, which is monitoring and managed by that HMI. So this is the consequences. Now, based on the parameters, that is SEFR, let's discuss what is SEFR is. So if we will see the matrix, so we need to score the impact, what kind of impact our risk and vulnerability can have based on what kind of impact they can create in our environment based on safety, environment, financial, and reputational. If it is impact on safety which can be treated with the help of basic medical treatment or basic first aid kit, then it is trivial. On the other hand, if it can create fatalities, if people's life is at danger, then that the same can be impacted critical. The same thing goes for environment, whether there will be impact on site or there will be major explosion, fire, which can impact environment, then it will become critical. So based on these factors of safety, environment, financial reputation, now these factors can be different for different organizations and industry. So we cannot utilize same risk matrix, same markers for each and every organization, plant and industry. We need to understand the architecture, we need to understand the impact, and based on that this risk matrix need to be created. Now it is not necessary that everyone will be using 5x5 risk matrix. The risk matrix could be 3x3 or 4x4 as well as now once we have identify impact, second thing is identifying the likelihood that whether impact could be very high, but is it possible that this kind of consequence can happen in my environment? So finding out the consequence that whether it is inoperable or it is rare or it is possible or very likely. Based on that, we will get scoring 1 to 5, and ultimately how critical that risk is, that will be identified. So the score can go from 1 to 25, right? In now let's come back to our risk assessment sheet. So now for this, it is defined that, okay, there can be medium impact on safety, moderate impact on environment, moderate impact on functional, and very minor impact on reputation. It's given. Based on that, we will be getting a score that is, let's say, based on all these three things, the score is calculated, which is highest of all three. That goes, 3, and so we have got the score for impact, as well as we have got that without, if we are not mitigating the threat, what is the likelihood. So then we have got the likelihood that it is, if you will say open port, it is very likely for this environment. If it is very likely for this environment, then it has been scored that it is moderate and likely. The score is coming 15. Now the score is coming 15. Our tolerable score is 5. So obviously we need to put countermeasures. Now the score is 15. Now let's try to map this with security level, that is 1, 2, 3, 4. So over here the methods which is used is risk reduction factor. So our tolerable risk is 5, that is low. If risk is anything more than or anything more than 5, so we are dividing the risk by 5, and if it is going more than 1, then the security level that need to be achieved is 1. If it is going 2 and above, the security level need to be achieved is 2. If it is getting 3 and above, the security level need to be achieved is 3. And if it is going above 4, then security level need to be achieved is 4. Here what we are doing is we are just dividing the UTL by tolerable risk. And this is giving us CRRF, and then CRRF is getting converted into SLT, that is target security level. Again, this could be different for different organization. It could be qualitative. It could be based on SL1, 2, 3, 4, as it is for different zones and different conduits. Now we know that we need to achieve SL2. Then what is the existing countermeasure which is already implemented? So over here, the countermeasure which is implemented, that they will disable telnet and they will use secure protocol. If that is done, then what is the mitigated threat likelihood? So now mitigated threat likelihood has converted from likely to unlikely. Once it is converted from likely to unlikely, the impact and the mitigated likelihood will get used for finding out what is the residual risk. Over here for this scenario, residual risk becomes 9. Now once the residual risk becomes 9, it is still more than tolerable risk, that is SL5. So then we need to have certain more recommendations to reduce this. So what is the recommendation which will be able to reduce this? If we implement VPN for remote access, then people then the overall exposure will reduce. So if what will happen if this already implemented? If they will implement this, then the threat landscape will reduce from unlikely to inoperable, which is it's very or it's kind of impossible to you know utilize or have this threat. So then the score gets reduced, because now your likelihood is inoperable, where the impact is your impact is minor, that is 3. However, your likelihood is inoperable. So the combination of both gives us risk, that is 3. And for that, we don't need to do any additional uh, secure configuration or any additional recommendation that need to be implemented, because that is under our tolerable risk. So then we will be avoiding whatever the risk which is uh, you know residual. So yeah, this will be the whole process of performing, and this will be performed against all the threats that can impact for that particular zone, which is visible in our uh, architecture, in our presentation, sorry, in our architecture, if you will see this. So yeah, so this is it from my side. Apologies, I have taken a lot more time because of uh, certain issues which was there on my side uh, related to internet.
Guys, the session is open for Q&A. You can drop your respective questions in the chat box. And Abhishek, there are a lot of questions for you in the chat box. If you could address them one by one from the starting.
Yeah, so I'll start from how reliable is to gather vulnerability report from passive scanning tool, and active scanning tool is not recommended. Abhinav, you might not get everything out of passive scanning tool. The open source tools are not that effective. Paid tools are also not effective for each and every protocols. They don't have all kind of dissectors available. And active scanning tool, yeah, ideally active scanning tool is not recommended. If you really want a highly reliable asset inventory or vulnerability report from uh, then you need to have certain kind of active scanning. Uh, there are certain active scanning which are allowed by your vendors. Let's say uh, even a Siemens has their own network mapping tool. It uses active scanning, but they are not that intrusive. So if if you don't want to perform any kind of manual work, then you can use less intrusive active scanning. However, you need to have an understanding how well your network is defined, what kind of processes and services are already running. If you start getting data, does your OT network infrastructure has that kind of bandwidth that that kind of data can be collected? Plus, that non-intrusive scanning also, I would recommend do it while your system is in downtime, or particular PLC is there which is not getting utilized much, or particular network zone is there, it is not utilizing much at particular duration of time. You can perform non-intrusive scanning during that time. Or if you have redundant architecture, redundant devices available, then you can think of, but that is an informed decision that we need to take. Again, Abhinav says the certain times Tenable scanning tool break our OT system, and that's the reason we have excluded those assets from scanning. And any NIDS vulnerabilities reports are not relatable to track it. So in Tenable scanning tool or Tenable.at, if you are using Nessus service and of Tenable OT, then it can impact a lot. So if you schedule your Nessus, if you are using Tenable.ot. First of all, if you are using Tenable.ot and you are using active scanning as well as their Nessus tool, then I would suggest that your architecture should be well segmented and segregated, so that you are running your Nessus only on level 3. It is not impacting your devices which are at level 1 and level 2. And uh, it is better if you are doing it scheduled. It should not be open and out and running every time. Yeah, so question from Jitin, that how is Grass Marlin better than Wireshark excluding the map feature? Yeah, I agree. Like the current version of Wireshark is also providing a lot of information out of it. However, the protocols in Grass Marlin are far more like Wireshark does not understand OT protocol a lot. It might give you that, it might map a lot of OT protocol as generic IT protocols. So Grass Marlin is a bit better in that front. For a complete OT operational technology security assessment from start to finish, what should be the balance between reliance on automated tools and manual testing? We will have to perform both. Only automated tool cannot be enough. So what you can do is, if you have automated tool, you can use it for continuous assessment, but based on what cycle you are having, whether it once in a year, twice in a year, or depending on how critical your infrastructure is, manual testing is important and manual assessment need to be performed, because automated tools might not be able to cover everything, or at least currently, without uh, performing intrusive or active scanning, uh, I don't see that tools are that matured. Or if they are matured, you need to open certain ports and services which you might not like to open. So you need to you know have a balance of both. What all security standards? Yeah, we are covering ISC 62443-3-2 only. Is the recorded session will be shared with us? Yeah, this it is already, I think, answered by Aparna that yes, the recording session will be shared. Open source tools for active scanning. If you really wanted to do active scanning, you can use OpenVAS for active scanning, but uh, try to keep your OT infrastructure separated while performing any kind of active scanning. OT IoT hacking. Yeah, Chetan, there are a lot of things you need to be very uh, you know OT hacking and IoT hacking, you need to be specific. If you are looking for IoT hacking, uh, again, there are a lot of section out of it, hardware, RF, BLE, where you wanted to go. Based on that, there will be a lot of resources. You can see articles and blogs which are available on Payatu's website. You can go through, if you wanted to go through the resources which are available related to OT cybersecurity. I'm not only talking about hacking. You can go through SCADA hacker website. So yeah, as well as there are a lot of blogs and tools, blogs available over the internet. What is your internship process? You can apply through our website. There are a lot of open positions available, and if you fit in those positions, uh, you know, you can get a call for interview. I think this is the answer for Dhruv. How to prepare a risk assessment report? Rishi, you can go to our website and download a holistic cybersecurity risk assessment report. Here we have only shown a risk assessment register. Over there, you can see the complete sample report and get an idea of it. Can OTICS security cover under Security Operations Center SOC scope? If you are collecting the logs and sending those logs to SOC, yes, it will cover under SOC. If your OT environment is not connected, logs are not going, then you don't have anything to monitor. Naveen Kumar says, through SIEM, can we gather OT ICS log? If not, please suggest a tool or a way. So SIEM will give you SIEM. So look, the logs that you wanted to collect, you can use a lot of. First thing, you need the OT tools that are the threat monitoring tools which are available, which are paid, like Clarity, Nozomi. You can utilize those. Then for again, if you wanted to collect logs, anything below firewall, you need to make sure how much bandwidth your existing infrastructure has. Initially, you can start with collecting firewall logs. Once you have started collecting those logs, you can integrate that in SIEM. Once that is done, then you can start collecting logs of your core switch, which is there in your OT environment. Start collecting that data, create rules as set based on this. Then if you have already implemented any threat modeling or asset monitoring and threat modeling tool, monitoring tool like Clarity, Nozomi and all, then you can collect information out of it. So that can be you know sent to SIEM. Further, again, if you wanted to collect more information of each and every device, network devices which are down below, first you need to see that whether your network infrastructure has that much bandwidth or not. In case, hi Jit, in case client customer doesn't have specific VLAN defined to separate out OT and IT asset, should the customer first work on segregating the network before a tool like Clarity Nozomi is introduced, since a lot of bandwidth would be consumed by IT. Yeah, Jit rightly said. I would prefer that they should segregate their OT and IT. Sometime what happens is you know you don't have a separate VLAN for CCTV and you are getting a lot of video packets, and that can uh, uh, choke down your overall network, that can bring down your infrastructure. So at least basic segregation, basic segmentation must be there, uh, so that we know and we can identify that what traffic we wanted to you know and get analyzed from Clarity and Nozomi, and we are only pushing that data in Clarity and Nozomi. Because if you will scan unnecessary IPs with the help of Clarity and Nozomi of any IT assets, which can be scanned by, if you segregate them well, it can be scanned by Nessus, you are also paying unnecessary for extra IP addresses. Is there any certificate required? Enki Punia, is there any certificate required to work in this domain like OSCP? Because sometime OSCP becomes blocker to work in security. So, Enki, the most important thing is right now, uh, currently what kind of market it is. I'm looking people who already have an experience of OT, and if they do certain cybersecurity certifications, so that field becomes open for them. And if you are a fresher, if you are starting new, then you know there are costly certificates like GICSP, which is from Sense. It is a very demanding certificate in this domain. And if you want to start like again in OT security, certificates are very costly. Then second certificate is completing complete ISA expert, where you can start with ISA 62443 cybersecurity fundamental specialist, and then you can go with risk assessment specialist and complete all four certificates. I would suggest instead of this, start with open source and free courses which are available by CISA. Like CISA has I 300 and 401 course available on their website. They once in a while they open the position monthly, they run that course again and again, so you need to enroll. Start with that and gain the experience, and based on that, you might get into any companies. Ritik, I missed the initial part. Could you please briefly describe the solution that provided the Payatu provided in the OT? So Ritik, we provide services in OT where we perform holistic cybersecurity assessment, including cybersecurity maturity assessment, risk assessment, technical assessment, that is gap and vulnerability assessment. We perform that. We provide CSAT, cybersecurity SAT and FET services if you are having any greenfield project running. We do deploy Clarity, Nozomi, Tenable.ot. We are channel partner with them, so we have that capability as well. And apart from that, for product companies, we perform compliance readiness assessment based on 62443, uh, 4-1 and 4-2. And we provide OT cybersecurity trainings. So these are customized OT cybersecurity trainings based on what kind of pool of people the company is having. We provide cybersecurity training as well. Rishi Prasad, I have a network PT knowledge, but I need to know more about OT and ICS PT. What are the things I need to prepare for PT? And also, do you have any checklist for OT ICS? What are do's and don'ts and need to focus? So Rishi, first thing, uh, do not run Nmap extensively on ICS environment. Do not run any active scanning on ICS environment. That is the first uh, you know thing I'll say. You can utilize information relate which is available in open source. You can have open source. You can utilize open source intelligence like Sodan or Google Docs. You can utilize known vulnerabilities which are there. You can utilize the known user IDs and passwords which are available in the open internet for all these devices to get the access and all. We might be uh, having another session for penetration testing, how we can perform or how we can test the ICS environment non-intrusively. So, however, for checklist, yes, we have uh, uh, assessment checklist based on NIST 882 available on our website. For rest of the things, they are not yet provided for the community. Yeah, Naveen. Sorry for asking too many questions. How to prepare OT ICS security solutions pre-sales consultant role? You need to get an understanding of all the OT environments really well. If you know the OT environment really well, you will be able to pitch any kind of solutions properly. If you know power utility well and you will pitch the same risk, and based on those risks, if you will pitch your solution to a manufacturing person, they will not agree and understand. So you need to know every industry which is there in OT and ICS. You need to have a basic understanding of that. Plus, you need to know whom you are pitching. You are pitching to IT manager, you are pitching to CISO, you are pitching to you know, a person who is from the OT background, and you need to, uh, create the scenarios and the questionnaire based on that when you are, your pitch based on that if you are preparing for, pre-sales consultants. Unmanaged switch, you might use, I'll have to check, you might use Kiwi if I'm not wrong, to fetch the data. Jitin, again, have you noticed any solution that additionally concentrates on L0 devices? So Jitin, Nozomi do collect the values, do collect the any change in the value process values. I'll not say that it is concentrating on L0 devices, but I'll say ki yeah, it focuses on process values, and if any change in process values, even in terms of that, you can get it done with the help of Clarity as well. Mrityunjay, even you can collect PLC logs. Like there are try to connect me separately. I'll try to give them certain even Siemens provides the information how you can collect logs from their devices, as well as there are certain open source implementations which you will get on GitHub that provides that how you can collect logs from PLCs. Yes, but again, in open source, we have limited, uh, you know, capabilities. So the log, as well as if you are trying to collect the logs, again, you are, the network will get impacted. So please keep in mind, if you are trying to collect any kind of logs, if you are collecting any logs from L1 PLCs, RTUs, first make sure that your network has that capacity, you have that bandwidth available. If not, rely on passive scanning, rely on information that you can get passively from with the help of PCAPs.
Guys, if you have any questions, you can connect with Abhishek directly on his LinkedIn account. Um, this is the link to his LinkedIn account. You can also DM your questions directly on our LinkedIn page. Thank you, Abhishek, for such a wonderful session, and thank you everyone for participating in this session. I hope you all love the session delivered by Abhishek. Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.